Hi viewers, you are listening the Alpha King's Untold Stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race and you will enjoy it a lot. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1. The wind didn't just whisper through the ancient, towering pines of the Silver Fang territory on that last brittle evening of the year. No, it screamed. It tore at the branches with a furious, icy breath, a sound that echoed the lonely, hollow place deep inside my own soul. Outside, the world was preparing for a celebration. I could hear it, even from my exile in the old caretaker's lodge on the very edge of the compound. The distant, merry clang of pots from the communal kitchens, the boisterous shouts of warriors hauling great logs for the bonfire, the bright, musical laughter of she-wolves decorating the square with lanterns that glowed like captured stars against the violet twilight. New Year's Eve, a night for the pack to gather as one, to feast, to howl at the moon in unified joy, to cast out the regrets of the old year and dream of the new. For everyone, that is, except for me. For Elara, the night held only silence and cold and the crushing weight of being forgotten. I stood at the single frost-rimed window of my sparse room, my fingertips turning numb where they pressed against the icy glass. Inside, the small fireplace hosted a meager, sputtering flame, starved of the good, dry timber that burned in every other hearth in the territory. Its feeble light did nothing to chase the deep shadows from the corners of the room, shadows that felt like they had taken up permanent residence, just like me. The chill was a living thing, seeping through the cracks in the log walls, settling in my bones. I pulled my worn, threadbare shawl closer, a useless gesture against a cold that came from within as much as from without. Weak, unwanted, human-born. The words were a relentless chant in my mind, a truth hammered into me since my first disastrous shift. While other pups blossomed into mighty wolves at 16, my own transformation had been a pathetic, shuddering thing, a faint silver shimmer over my skin, a discomfort in my bones, and then nothing. No majestic wolf form, no surge of predatory strength, just a girl left trembling and ashamed in the moonlit circle, a flaw in the proud, powerful lineage of the Silver Fang pack, a defect to be managed, hidden away like a shameful secret. My parents, long gone, had been respected warriors. Their memory was all I had, and I felt I tarnished it every day I drew breath. Tonight, the hiding felt final. Like the old year, I too was being discarded. A particularly loud burst of laughter from the square below made me flinch. I could picture them all. Ronan, our fierce and unforgiving alpha, holding court. His beta, Darian, loyal and stern. The warriors, the hunters, the elders. A tapestry of strength and belonging from which a single silvery thread had been pulled loose. Me. I was so lost in the familiar, painful spiral of my thoughts that the sudden, violent crash against my door sounded like a thunderclap. I jerked back from the window, my heart slamming against my ribs with a force that stole my breath. That was no friendly knock. It was the heavy, impatient fist of authority. "Elara, open this door, now." The voice was deep, gravelly, and brooked no argument. Kale, the pack Gamma, enforcer of Alpha Ronan's will, a mountain of a man with a temper as sharp as his claws. A cold dread, sharper than the winter air, poured down my spine. What could the pack possibly want with me on this night? Had I committed some new, unknown transgression? Was I to be formally cast out as the year turned? The possibilities swirled, a vortex of fear in my stomach. With trembling hands, I fumbled with the simple latch and pulled the heavy wooden door open just a crack. The freezing wind blasted in, but it was nothing compared to the glacial look in Kale's dark eyes as he loomed in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking what little light there was. "You are to come to the square," he stated, his voice flat. "Immediately." "The square?" I stammered, my voice a mere whisper against the wind. "But the ceremony, I'm not—" "Alpha Ronan's orders," he cut me off, his lip curling slightly as his gaze swept over my thin frame and plain dress. "He wants everyone present, even you. Don't make us wait." He turned on his heel, his cloak snapping behind him, clearly expecting me to follow without question. For a moment, I stood frozen, panic icing my veins. To be paraded before the entire pack on this sacred night, it could only mean public humiliation, a final reinforcement of my place before the new year began. This was it, the end of whatever fragile tolerance I had been clinging to. With a shuddering breath that misted in the frigid air, I stepped out of my lonely shelter and into the biting cold of the night, pulling my shawl over my head. I followed Kale's retreating back, my bare feet slipping on the frost-hardened ground, the joyous sounds of the pack growing louder with every step toward the glowing square. Each laugh felt like a needle prick. Each cheerful shout was a reminder of a world I could never be part of. I was walking not toward a celebration, but toward my own sentencing. Little did I know, the universe had a far different and infinitely more terrifying fate in store, for high above our territory, in a palace of stone and ancient power, a king was stirring from his throne, his senses suddenly, violently reaching across the miles towards a spark of silver he was never meant to find. The music didn't stop, but the laughter did. It was replaced by whispers. I felt them like physical blows, hisses of disdain, muttered words that carried on the smoky air. Why is she here? Look at her, shivering like a leaf. A bad omen on New Year's bringing that out. My cheeks burned with a shame so profound I thought I might dissolve into the cold earth. I wrapped my arms tightly around myself, wishing the threadbare shawl was a cloak of true invisibility. Kale led me to the very front of the gathering, right before the raised wooden dais where the pack leadership sat. There, Alpha Ronan presided like a carved statue of judgment. His stern face, framed by a dark beard streaked with silver, was impassive as his cold, flinty eyes fell upon me. Beside him, Beta Darien watched with a faint, pitying frown that was almost worse than outright scorn. "Elara," Ronan's voice boomed, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The drums fell silent, every single face turned toward us. "You stand before your pack on the cusp of a new year, a time of renewal, of strength." He paused, letting the weight of his words and the silence press down on me. I could barely breathe. "Yet, for years," he continued, his tone dropping, becoming almost sorrowful, a theatrical public sorrow, "you have embodied neither. You are a drain on our resources, a question mark in our lineage. Your presence is a silent protest against the natural order of strength that defines us." Tears, hot and humiliating, welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. I would not cry, not here, not now. "Therefore," Ronan declared, lifting his chin, "as the old year dies, so too must this lingering weakness be cast out. From this night forward, your status is formally rescinded. You will no longer bear the name Silverfang in any meaningful way. You will serve the pack in silence, from the shadows, as a drudge. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not approach the communal fire. You will not look any ranked wolf in the eye. Your existence is one of utility, not kinship. This is my decree for the strength of the whole." A collective approving rumble went through the crowd. It wasn't anger, it was agreement, relieved agreement. The flawed piece was being officially removed from the puzzle. The pack could move on, pure and strong. The finality of it shattered something inside me. The last fragile thread of hope I hadn't even known I was clinging to snapped. I felt myself sway, the world tilting. This wasn't just rejection, it was an erasure. But just as the pronouncement settled over the square like a shroud, a new sound cut through the winter night. Not a drum, not a voice. It was a horn, a deep, resonant, mournful blast that seemed to shake the very stars. It came from the northern pass, the entrance to our territory, a sound no pack member had heard in a generation. The royal summons. Every head, including Alpha Ronan's, jerked toward the sound. Confusion replaced the cruel certainty on their faces. The horn blew again, longer, more insistent. And then they appeared. From the dark tree line, figures emerged into the torchlight of the square. Not our warriors. These were strangers, clad in armor that gleamed like black ice under the moon. Their cloaks were a deep midnight blue, and they moved with a lethal synchronized grace that made our strongest fighters look like untrained pups. The Royal Guard. In the center of their formation walked a man who was not just a man. He was power personified. Taller than any here, with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of mountains. He wore a simple crown of obsidian and platinum, and his hair was the color of winter wheat. His eyes, even from across the square, I felt them. They were the color of a storm-chased sky, swirling with ancient magic and an intensity that pinged me where I stood. This was him, Lysander, the Alpha King, a ruler so remote, so legendary he was almost a myth. The entire pack fell to their knees, bowing their heads in immediate, terrified submission. Except me. I was too stunned, too broken to move. I just stood there, a solitary, shivering figure in my rags, staring at the myth made flesh. His gaze swept over the bowed forms, over the Alpha who was now prostrate on his dais. Those stormy eyes passed over the warriors, the elders, the she-wolves. And then they stopped. They locked on mine. A jolt, like white-hot lightning, seared through my entire being. It wasn't pain. It was recognition, a primal, terrifying, soul-deep pull. My breath hitched. My knees threatened to buckle for an entirely new reason. A low, almost inaudible growl vibrated from the king's chest, a sound that resonated in my own. His eyes widened just a fraction. The absolute regal composure on his face fractured for a single, heart-stopping second, revealing sheer, unadulterated shock. He took a step forward, then another. His guards moved with him, a silent, deadly entourage. He walked past the kneeling Alpha, past the bowed Beta, ignoring them completely. He walked straight through the terrified, silent crowd, his path unwavering. He was coming toward me, the forgotten one, the rejected drudge. He stopped mere 3 feet away. The scent of winter pine and crackling ozone enveloped me. The power radiating from him was a tangible force, humming in the air. He looked down at me, his storm cloud eyes searching my face, my wide, terrified eyes. The entire world held its breath. Then the Alpha King, ruler of all werewolf kind, did the unthinkable. He slowly, deliberately went down on one knee before me, before the gasping pack, before his own stunned guards. His voice, when he spoke, was low, but it carried to the farthest corners of the deathly silent square. It was a voice of absolute authority, and yet, beneath it, thrummed a note of something raw and awestruck. Mine. The single word hung in the frozen air, a declaration that shattered 1,000 ancient laws and set my doomed fate ablaze with a terrifying, impossible new light. Silence. A silence so deep, so profound, it seemed to swallow the crackle of the bonfire, the very beat of my own frantic heart. The world had narrowed to the space between the kneeling king and my frozen, disbelieving self. I could see the intricate patterns on the black and platinum crown, the faint scar that traced his strong jaw, the impossible storm swirling in his eyes as he gazed up at me, The king was kneeling to me. Then the spell shattered. A collective gasping inhale swept through the pack like a shockwave. Whispers erupted, sharp and disbelieving. What is he doing? The king kneeling to the weakling? This is some trick, a test. From the corner of my eye, I saw Alpha Ronin slowly rise from his own bow, his face a mask of confusion that was rapidly curdling into outrage. His own formal rejection of me still hung in the air, and now the highest authority in our world was contradicting it in the most spectacular, humiliating way. His own formal rejection of me still hung in the air, and now the highest authority in our world was contradicting it in the most spectacular, humiliating way possible. The king, Lysander, paid the rising tide of sound no mind. His focus remained entirely on me, an anchor in a suddenly chaotic sea. He extended a hand toward me, not to take mine, but as a steady, offered presence. His voice, though still quiet, cut through the murmurs with effortless command. "Do not be afraid." But I was terrified. This was worse than rejection. This was the attention of a son, and I was a creature of shadows, certain to be burned to ashes. I took a stumbling step back, my bare heels scraping on the frozen ground. The movement broke the strange, intimate bubble between us. That's when Alpha Ronin found his voice, though it was strained, laced with a desperate respect that couldn't quite mask his panic. "My king, forgive this interruption. You honor our humble pack with your presence on this sacred night. But this female, Elara, she is nothing, a drudge, a human born with no true wolf. She was just now being formally placed in her rightful servile position for the good of the pack. There must be some mistake." The word mistake seemed to hang in the air, a dangerous challenge. Lysander rose to his full, imposing height in one smooth, powerful motion. He did not turn to face Ronin immediately. Instead, he looked at me for a heartbeat longer, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not anger, but a fierce, protective resolve that stole my breath anew. Then he turned. The temperature in the square seemed to drop 10 degrees. The playful winter chill became the deep freeze of absolute authority. Lysander's gaze swept over Ronin, and the alpha of the Silverfang pack, a powerful leader in his own right, seemed to shrink. "There is no mistake, Alpha Ronin." Lysander's voice was no longer low. It was a clear, cold clarion that rang with the weight of centuries. "I felt the pull across 5 territories. The moon's bond does not err. Her name is Elara, you say?" He said my name. The king said my name. It had never sounded like that before. Not a dismissive sigh, not a curse, but a word of weight and meaning. "Yes, but your majesty," Ronin tried again, his face flushing. "I am aware of your laws, your traditions of culling perceived weakness, ancient barbaric customs that have no place under a unified crown." He paused, letting the reprimand sink in, watching Ronin pale. "You declared her a drudge. You severed her from your pack bond. Is this true?" Ronin, trapped by his own very public decree, could only give a stiff, reluctant nod. "For the strength of the pack, my king." "A pack's strength," Lysander said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, almost conversational tone, "is not in its purity, but in its heart, in its ability to shelter all its members. You cast out a treasure and called it garbage." He turned his back on the speechless alpha, a gesture of supreme dismissal. His attention returned to me. The intensity was still there, but it was tempered now with a deliberate softness, as if he were trying to gentle a wild, frightened bird. "Elara," he said, my name again on his lips. "You are packless by their decree, but you are not alone. You are not unwanted." He took a single step closer, and this time I didn't retreat. I was rooted, mesmerized by the certainty in his eyes. "The moon goddess," he declared, his voice rising so every soul in the square could hear, "in her infinite and mysterious wisdom, has woven our threads together. The mate bond has spoken. You are my chosen, my fated one." Chaos, pure, unadulterated chaos erupted. Gasps turned into shouts of disbelief. A mate? The Alpha King's mate? A low-born, wolfless female? It was an impossibility, a scandal that threatened the very foundations of their world. But Lysander was not finished. He raised a hand, and silence, strained and brittle, fell once more. "Therefore, by the ancient and supreme right of the mate bond, and by my authority as Alpha King, I claim you, not as a subject, not as a servant." He looked directly at me, and the world fell away again. "The moon goddess," he declared, his voice rising so every soul in the square could hear, "in her infinite and mysterious wisdom, has woven our threads together. The mate bond has spoken. You are my chosen, my fated one." A pause followed, a looming, suspect moment, before Lysander added the final shattering detail. "This is my claim before the crown, a claim that no mortal may question. You will come with me to the Stonehaven Citadel tonight." The finality of it was a physical blow. Go with him? Leave the only home I'd ever known, even if it was a prison? Step into a world of unimaginable power and scrutiny? Before I could form a single coherent thought, a new voice, shrill with fury, cut through the night. "No!" A figure pushed through the crowd. Selene, the pack's prized she-wolf, beautiful, powerful, and until this moment, the one many whispered would make a fitting queen for a visiting dignitary, perhaps even catch a royal eye someday. Her face was contorted with a rage so potent that it twisted her lovely features. She stared at Lysander with a desperate, possessive hunger. Then her venomous gaze landed on me. "You can't. She's a trick, a witch. She's bespelled you, my king. Look at her. She is nothing. The bond must be with someone else, someone worthy. It's a mistake. It has to be." Her outburst was the spark on dry tinder. Muttered agreements arose from her friends and admirers. The pack's shock was hardening into resentment, directed squarely at me. I saw it in their eyes. This wasn't just about tradition anymore. This was about envy, about the natural order being upturned in the most insulting way possible. Lysander's expression didn't change, but the air around him crackled with a warning so potent my skin prickled. He did not even look at Selene. His eyes remained on me, but his words were for everyone. "The only mistake," he said, his voice lethally quiet, "is in this pack's blindness. The only spell is the one the moon herself has cast, and the only nothing I see here is the emptiness in the hearts of those who would cast out their own." He finally shifted his gaze, sweeping it over the hostile crowd, his royal authority settling over them like a heavy mantle, forcing their silence. "My guard will escort her. We leave now. Any who attempt to interfere," he paused, and the threat was as clear as ice, "will answer to me." He turned to his captain, a stern-faced warrior with eyes like flint. "Kieran, ensure her safe passage. Bring her to the royal sleigh." Then Lysander did something utterly unexpected. He reached up and unfastened his heavy, moonlight blue cloak, lined with thick, silver-gray fur. Without ceremony, he stepped forward and draped it around my shaking shoulders. The weight of it was immense, both physically and symbolically. It was warm, impossibly warm, and carried his scent, winter pine, ozone, and kingly power, engulfing me, marking me.
"Come, Elara," he said, and this time it was not a royal command, but an invitation, low and meant only for my ears. "Your old year ends tonight. Let us see what the new one brings. With the eyes of my former pack burning holes into my back, their hatred and awe and confusion a palpable force, I took a hesitant step forward, enveloped in the king's cloak. I was walking away from a life of scorn toward a future of terrifying, unimaginable privilege. But as I passed Celine, I saw the promise of pure, undiluted hatred in her eyes. This was not over. The king had chosen me, but in doing so, he had ignited a fire that would threaten to consume us both, and I, who had never fought for anything, would have to find the strength to stand, or be destroyed by the very destiny that had plucked me from the shadows. The fur-lined cloak was a furnace against my skin, a shocking contrast to the perpetual chill I had lived with for so long. Its weight was both a burden and an anchor. The scent of the king, Lysander, a dizzying foreign perfume that made my head spin. I was walking in a dream, a terrifying, exquisite dream. The crunch of snow underfoot, the guttural whispers that chased me like phantoms, the searing heat of Celine's glare, they all felt muted, distant, as if I were moving through deep water. Kieran, the king's stone-faced captain, fell into step beside me, a silent, armored presence. He did not touch me, but his posture created an impenetrable buffer between me and the seething crowd of my former pack. I could feel their eyes, hundreds of them, like hot brands on the back of the cloak. Confusion, fury, a vicious, jealous curiosity. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead on the path leading out of the square toward the northern pass, afraid that if I looked back, the reality of what was happening would shatter me. We passed the last of the timber houses, leaving the circle of torchlight behind. The world plunged into the deep blue darkness of a winter forest at night, broken only by the moon shining on the virgin snow and the cold, steady lanterns held by the royal guard. The joyful noises of the New Year's celebration faded, replaced by the sighing of the wind in the pines and the soft, rhythmic tread of boots on snow. At the head of the column, I could see Lysander's broad back. He walked with a predator's effortless grace, never looking back, but I felt his awareness of me as surely as I felt the ground beneath my feet. That strange electric pull was still there, a taut, humming wire connecting my core to his. It was both comforting and profoundly unsettling. We reached the mouth of the pass. There, waiting like a creature from a legend, was the royal conveyance. It was not a carriage, but a long, elegant sleigh, crafted from dark, polished wood and intricate silver metalwork. Two massive, spectral white wolves, larger than any I had ever seen, were harnessed to it. They stood perfectly still, their intelligent eyes gleaming like moonstones in the dark. They were dire wolves, creatures of myth and royal lineage. Lysander stopped and finally turned. In the moonlight, his features were even more starkly handsome, etched with a timeless authority. His stormy eyes found me immediately, and the connection hummed louder. "Kieran will assist you," he said, his voice calm as if he retrieved rejected she-wolves every night. He then moved to the front of the sleigh, speaking in a low tone to the dire wolves, his hand resting on the great head of the nearest one, a gesture of deep familiarity. Kieran offered a hand, not to my arm, but as a steadying block to brace against as I climbed into the deep, plush interior of the sleigh. The seats were upholstered in midnight velvet and piled with furs. I sank into them, the luxury so alien it felt like a trick. I huddled into the corner, pulling Lysander's cloak even tighter around me, trying to make myself small. A moment later, the sleigh dipped with a new weight. Lysander settled onto the seat opposite me, not beside me. I was grateful for the space, for the dimness inside the sleigh that hid my expression. He gave a soft, almost imperceptible command, and with a lurch we were moving. The dire wolves surged forward in utter silence, their powerful bodies pulling the sleigh with a speed that stole my breath. The forest became a blur of black and white. For a long time, there was only the sound of the wind and the whisper of the runners on snow. The tension inside the sleigh was a living thing. I dared a glance at him. He was looking out at the speeding landscape, his profile stark and thoughtful. A king, the Alpha King, and he said I was his mate. The word echoed in the silent space between us, immense and impossible. "You are cold." His statement startled me. He wasn't looking at me, but he knew. I'm all right," I stammered, my voice a thin thread. "You are not," he said simply, finally turning those potent eyes on me. "You have been cold for a long time, in more ways than one." The unexpected understanding in his words threatened to undo me. I looked down at my hands, clenched in the fur of his cloak. They were rough, chapped from work, so different from the elegance surrounding me. "Why?" The question burst from me before I could stop it, small and broken. "Why me? You heard them. I'm nothing. I have no wolf. I'm not strong. I'm not worthy of a king." He was silent for a long moment. The sleigh sped on, carrying us further away from everything I had ever known. "Worthy," he repeated, the word tasting strange on his tongue. A concept invented by small-minded alphas to control their packs. The moon goddess does not deal in worthiness, Elara. She deals in balance, in completion. He leaned forward slightly, the movement causing my heart to stutter. For a century, I have ruled alone. I have felt the weight of the crown, the silence of the throne. I felt a hollow place that no victory, no law, no tribute could ever fill. I believed it was the price of kingship. His gaze was searingly direct. Tonight, when that hollow place suddenly ached, when it pulled me with a force that overrode all reason toward a distant, fading spark in a territory known for its harshness, I understood. It wasn't a hollow place, it was a space waiting to be filled. By you. Tears, hot and silent, spilled over my cheeks. No one had ever spoken of me as anything but a lack, a deficiency. He spoke of me as an answer. "But what if I can't fill it?" whispered, the fear crushing. "What if I'm a mistake? What will your people say? What will your court do? They'll see what the Silverfangs saw. They'll hate me." A faint, dangerous smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My court," he said, his voice dropping, "is a den of vipers and sycophants. They will say many things. They will scheme and whisper and test you. As for hate," he looked out the window again, his jaw tightening. "Let them try. My entire reign has been a lesson in enforcing order on chaos. Protecting what is mine is the one duty I will relish above all others." What is mine? The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened me. Instead, a tiny, forbidden flicker of warmth ignited in my chest. For the first time in my life, I belonged to someone, and he, impossibly, belonged to me. "You are not a mistake, Elara," he said, his voice final. "You are a revelation, and tomorrow, when the sun rises on the new year, the entire kingdom will begin to learn that truth. Rest now. The journey is long." He leaned back, closing his eyes, a picture of regal composure. But I saw the way his hands rested on his knees, fingers curled just slightly, as if holding on to his control by a thread. He was as affected by this as I was. The realization was as terrifying as it was thrilling. I curled deeper into the furs, the rhythmic motion of the sleigh lulling my exhausted body. As I drifted into a fitful doze, his words swirled in my mind. A revelation. But revelations had a way of blinding people, of burning those who were not prepared for their light. I was being carried toward a glittering citadel of power, wrapped in a king's cloak, claimed by a royal mate.
And somewhere behind us, in the dark woods we had left behind, the embers of Celine's hatred and Alpha Ronan's humiliation still glowed, waiting for a breath of wind to turn them into a wildfire that could chase us all the way to the throne itself. Chapter 5. I must have slept, because the world outside the sleigh windows had changed. The dense, familiar forest of the Silverfang territory was long gone. We were speeding through a vast, moonlit valley, its snow-covered expanse broken by jagged black mountain peaks that clawed at the star-flecked sky. The air felt different, thinner, sharper, charged with a kind of ancient energy that made the tiny hairs on my arms stand up even beneath the heavy cloak. And then I saw it. Carved into the very face of the tallest mountain like a crown set upon a stony brow was the Stonehaven Citadel. It was not a castle as I had imagined from stories. It was a fortress of terrifying grandeur, a seamless fusion of brutal strength and breathtaking beauty. Towers of dark gleaming stone soared into the night, their peaks lost in wisps of cloud. Windows, like 1,000 watching eyes, glowed with warm golden light. A single colossal bridge, seemingly spun from moonlight and stone, arched over a fathomless chasm to the main gates. It was a place of legend, the heart of the werewolf kingdom, and I was being taken directly into its core. My breath fogged the cold glass of the window. A fresh, dizzying wave of panic washed over me. What was I doing here? This was a world of warriors, politics, and ancient bloodlines. I was a girl who could barely light a fire without help. The sleigh began to climb, following a wide, meticulously cleared road that zigzagged up the mountainside. The direwolves never slowed. As we approached the great bridge, I saw figures lining the towering ramparts, guards, their armor catching the moonlight. The royal guard at the gates, identical to the ones escorting us, snapped to attention as we passed through the colossal, silently opening doors. We entered a courtyard vast enough to hold the entire Silverfang village. Torches blazed in sconces the size of small trees, and there, waiting in ordered, silent rows, were people, dozens of them. Men and women dressed in fine, somber fabrics, their faces pale and carefully blank in the flickering light. The king's court. The sleigh glided to a silent halt. The tension inside it, which had momentarily eased during the journey, now returned, thicker than ever. Lysander opened his eyes as if he had merely been resting them, not sleeping. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second I saw the storm in his gaze calm, as if he were steadying himself. For me. "Remember," he said, his voice low but firm, "you are not on trial here. You walk in as my chosen. Hold your head high, Elara. They are looking at a future queen." A future queen? The words were so absurd I almost laughed, a hysterical bubble of terror rising in my throat. He stepped out of the sleigh first. 100 eyes watched his every move. Then he turned and offered me his hand. It was not the polite, distant hand Kieran had offered. It was a direct, claiming gesture, palm up, waiting. A king's hand, offered to a ragged girl in a borrowed cloak. The entire courtyard was a painting of frozen suspense. Swallowing the lump of pure fear in my throat, I placed my trembling, work-roughened hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and strong and impossibly gentle. He didn't pull, he simply was there, an unshakable support as I climbed out onto the smooth, icy stones of the citadel floor. A collective, almost imperceptible inhale swept through the assembled courtiers. I felt their gazes like physical touch, scanning my thin frame, my tangled, wind-blown hair, my bare, dirty feet peeking from beneath the cloak. I saw the subtle curls of lips, the quickly masked flashes of disdain and incredulity, but no one made a sound. The king's presence commanded absolute silence. "Captain Kieran," he said, his voice carrying easily in the hushed courtyard. "Have chambers prepared in the royal wing, the Sunstone suite. Tell Mira, the head handmaiden, that her new lady requires her immediate attention." A murmur rippled through the crowd at that. The Sunstone Suite? It was adjacent to the king's own rooms, reserved for royalty. A tall, severe-looking woman near the front, with hair the color of iron and a dress of unadorned gray silk, stiffened almost imperceptibly. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto me for a cold second before she bowed her head. "At once, Your Majesty," Kieran said, bowing and striding away. Lysander began to walk, still holding my hand, leading us toward a pair of enormous carved doors at the far end of the courtyard. The courtiers parted before us like a sea, bowing deeply as we passed. I kept my eyes fixed on Lysander's broad back, using him as a shield against their stares. We entered the citadel proper, and the world changed again. Grandeur closed in on me. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow high above. Tapestries depicting epic battles and lunar cycles lined walls of polished stone. The air was scented with beeswax, incense, and the faint, cold smell of ancient rock. It was overwhelming, a labyrinth of power and history. He led me through silent, echoing corridors, up a grand, sweeping staircase, and into a quieter, more opulent wing. Finally, he stopped before a set of double doors inlaid with a sun motif made of citrine and gold. The Sunstone Suite. He released my hand, and I immediately felt the loss of his anchor. He pushed the doors open, revealing a sitting room that was larger than the entire caretaker's lodge. A fire roared in a massive fireplace, and soft rugs covered the floor. It was beautiful, terrifyingly so. "Mira will be here shortly," he said, standing in the doorway. He made no move to enter. "She will see to your needs. Rest. Tomorrow we will talk." He seemed to hesitate, the king's composure faltering for just a moment as he looked at me standing small and lost in the center of the lavish room. "You are safe here, Elara. No one will harm you. On my life." With that, he inclined his head, a gesture that felt strangely intimate, and closed the doors, leaving me alone in the echoing silence. The weight of the day, the shock, the fear came crashing down. I sank onto the edge of a plush divan, my legs giving way. I was in the Alpha King's citadel, in a royal suite, claimed as his mate. It was a fairy tale, the kind that ended with the princess being devoured by wolves. A soft knock came at an inner door I hadn't noticed. It opened, and a woman entered. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with a kind, weathered face and intelligent, warm brown eyes. She wore a simple, well-made dress and moved with a quiet efficiency. She curtsied deeply. "My lady, I am Mira. I am to attend you." She rose, and her eyes took me in, not with judgment, but with a practical, assessing kindness. She saw the dirt, the exhaustion, the fear. "A hot bath has been drawn, and there are clean clothes. Would you permit me to assist you?" Her tone was so gentle, so devoid of the scorn I was braced for, that a fresh wave of tears threatened. I could only nod mutely. The bath was in an adjoining chamber, steam rising from a sunken tub filled with scented water. Mira helped me out of the rough homespun dress and the king's immense cloak, folding the latter with a reverence that made my stomach flutter. As I sank into the blissfully hot water, she worked silently, washing my hair with delicate herbs, the grime and shame of the Silver Fang territory slooshing away. "The king," I whispered, my voice echoing softly in the steamy room. He is sure." Mira's hands stilled for a moment in my hair. "The King Lysander is many things, my lady. Impulsive is not one of them. He is a ruler of deep conviction. If he has brought you here, declared you before his court and his guard, he is sure." She paused. "The court will not make it easy. They are set in their ways. But the king's will is law, and his protection is absolute." Her words were meant to comfort, but they only highlighted the danger.
His protection was absolute, until it wasn't, until the pressure from his nobles, from other alphas, from traditions older than the citadel itself became too great. Cleaned, dried, and dressed in a soft silver nightgown that felt like a cloud against my skin, I returned to the main sitting room. Mira had left a tray of broth and bread by the fire. "Sleep, my lady," she said softly. "Tomorrow is a new day, a new world." She left, and I was alone again. I went to the window, pulling back a heavy curtain. The view was of the moonlit valley, the world spread out below like a toy. So high up, so isolated. And then I saw it, a flicker of movement in the gardens far below, just at the edge of the torchlight. Two figures, locked in a tense, whispered conversation. One was the severe, gray-clad woman from the courtyard. The other was a man, tall and lean, with an elegant, cruel posture I didn't recognize. He glanced up, as if feeling my gaze, and even from this distance I felt the chill of his scrutiny before he melted back into the shadows with the woman. They had been talking about me. I knew it with a certainty that froze my blood in the veins. The king had declared me safe, but as I stood in my gilded cage, looking down at the scheming shadows in his own garden, I understood the terrifying truth. The greatest danger was not from the pack I had left. It was here, in the glittering, silent heart of Stonehaven, waiting for me to take one single wrong step.
Kieran himself came to escort me. His expression was as impassive as ever, but he gave a slight, respectful nod. "My lady, this way." The walk through the citadel in daylight was no less intimidating. Courtiers and servants moved through the corridors, their conversations hushing as we passed. The stairs were less blatant than in the courtyard, but more insidious. Curious, calculating glances from behind half-open doors, whispered comments swallowed as we drew near. I felt like a rare, fragile animal on display. The solar was a bright, high-ceilinged room with windows overlooking the mountains. A small, intimate table was set for two, and there, standing by the window, was Lysander. He turned as we entered. In the daylight, he was even more imposing. The storm in his eyes was quieter now, a steady, watchful gray. He was dressed not in royal regalia, but in dark, practical trousers and a tunic. Though the fabric was rich and the cut impeccable, he looked every inch the warrior king. "Thank you, Kieran," he said, and the captain bowed and retreated, closing the door, leaving us utterly alone. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the fire. The mate pull hummed between us, a palpable force that made the air feel charged. "Elara," he said, my name a soft command. "Please sit. You must be hungry." I moved to the chair he held out for me, my movements stiff. He took his own seat opposite. The spread of food was lavish: eggs, smoked fish, fruits that had no business existing in winter, warm bread. "Did you sleep?" he asked, pouring tea for me first, then for himself. "A little," I admitted, unable to meet his gaze for long. I focused on the steam rising from my cup. "The citadel can be overwhelming at first. Its silence is loud." His observation was so apt it startled me. He understood the pressure of these ancient stones. "You saw the court last night. They are a necessary part of ruling, but they are not my pack. Do not mistake their obedience for loyalty." I dared a glance at him. "The woman in gray and the man in the garden?" His eyes sharpened. "You saw them?" I nodded, describing the severe woman and the lean, cruel-looking man. A shadow passed over Lysander's face, a flicker of cold anger. "Lady Cordelia, the head of the household and a distant cousin of my father's, and Lord Varen from the Amberwood territory. Ambitious, he has long hoped to tie his bloodline to mine through his daughter." He set his cup down with a precise click. "They were discussing you, no doubt, testing the waters of this new development. The confirmation chilled me. They hate me already? They fear you, he corrected, his gaze intense. You represent change, an unknown variable. You disrupt plans decades in the making. To creatures of tradition and ambition, that is more terrifying than hatred. He leaned forward slightly. You must understand something, Elara. Our bond, it is not just a personal matter, it is political. By claiming you, I have upended the expected order of succession, of alliances. There will be those who seek to prove the bond false, or to remove you as an obstacle. Remove you. The words hung in the sunny room, a dark stain. Then why? I burst out, the fear making me bold. Why claim me so publicly? Why not, I don't know, keep it secret? Spare me this. For the first time, I saw a crack in his royal armor, a flash of raw, frustrated passion. Because you have been hidden away in shame for too long, he said, his voice low but fervent. Because I will not have the other half of my soul treated as a dirty secret. Because the world needs to see that strength does not always roar. Sometimes, he said, his eyes holding mine captive, it is a quiet, enduring flame that survives the longest winter. I claimed you publicly to give you status, to force them to acknowledge you. It is a shield, Elara, even if it also makes you a target. His words washed over me, a confusing torrent of protection and peril. I don't know how to be a shield. I don't even know how to be a proper wolf. He reached across the table then, not to take my hand, but to place his own firmly, warmly over it. The contact sent a jolt of that electric awareness through me, but also a profound, steadying calm. You do not have to know yet. You only have to be. Be here, eat, rest, learn. I will teach you what it means to be a queen. And as for your wolf, he paused, his thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles. She is there. I feel her, faint like a star behind a cloud, but she is there. We will find her together. The promise in his words, the sheer, impossible faith he had in a version of me I couldn't even sense, stole my breath. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. The meal continued in a slightly easier silence. He asked me quiet questions about my life before, not about my weakness, but about the herbs I'd tended in my small garden, the stories I remembered from my parents. He listened as if my simple memories were matters of state. As we finished, a different kind of knock sounded, authoritative, impatient. Before Lysander could respond, the door opened. Lord Varen stood there, the elegant, cruel man from the garden. He offered a bow that was just a hair too shallow to be truly respectful. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. A matter requires your attention in the Hall of Annals. His cold, assessing eyes slid to me, lingering on my simple dress, my untouched plate. A faint, dismissive smile touched his lips. You see you are occupied. Lysander's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the edge of the table. The air in the room grew heavy. I am breakfasting with my intended, Varen. The matter can wait. It concerns the northern border tithes, Your Majesty, Varen pressed smoothly, his gaze still on me, a silent accusation. And the repercussions of last night's unexpected departure from tradition. The other alphas are sending queries. It was a direct challenge, a reminder that my presence had consequences beyond this sunny room. Lysander's expression turned to ice. He stood, and the sheer force of his rising made Varen take an unconscious step back. Then tell the alphas their king is attending to the most important matter of his reign, he said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. You are dismissed. The rebuff was absolute, humiliating. Varen's face flushed with anger he could not show. He bowed again, stiffly, and withdrew, closing the door with a sharp click.
The brief peace was shattered. Lysander turned to me, the storm back in his eyes, but now it was tinged with concern. This is what it will be, Elara. Tests, provocations. They will try to pull me away from you, to prove you are insignificant. I looked from the closed door to his fierce, protective face. The fear was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but beneath it, something new stirred, a flicker of defiance. They wanted me to be insignificant. They wanted me to break. I took a deep, shaky breath and met the king's stormy gaze. "Then, I suppose," I said, my voice trembling but clear, "I must learn to be significant." A slow, genuine smile, the first I had ever seen from him, touched Lysander's lips. It transformed his face, making him look younger, fiercer, more breathtaking. In that moment, I didn't see just a king protecting a burden. I saw a man looking at his equal and seeing a spark worth fanning into a flame. The game had begun, and I, Elara the Unwanted, would have to learn to play. Chapter 7. The days that followed were a strange, suspended reality. I existed in a bubble within the Stonehaven Citadel, a bubble of relative safety, opulent silence, and relentless, subtle scrutiny. Mira was my constant, gentle guide. She taught me the labyrinthine layout of the royal wing, the names of the prominent courtiers, always with a quiet warning attached, and the complex, unspoken rules of royal life. I learned to sit, to walk, to take tea in a way that drew no more criticism than necessary. It was a performance, and I was a clumsy understudy. I saw Lysander daily, but often only briefly. Our morning meals in the solar became our anchor. He would ask about my lessons, listen with a focus that made me feel my words mattered. He never pressed about my wolf, but his belief that she existed was a quiet, constant presence between us, like a promise waiting to be kept. The rest of the court watched. They watched me walk the high, glass-enclosed promenades with Mira. They watched from shadowed alcoves as Kieran escorted me to the Citadel's vast library, a place of wonder that quickly became my refuge. Their whispers were like the distant hiss of the mountain wind, always there, just beyond comprehension. It was in the library, a week after my arrival, that the first real test came. I was tucked into a window seat, a heavy book on Citadel history open but unread on my lap. I was staring out at the unforgiving peaks, thinking of the small, smoky fires of the Silverfang territory, when a smooth, cultured voice broke the silence. "The view is rather stark, is it not? It grows on one, I suppose, much like the local customs." I turned, my heart leaping into my throat. Lord Varen stood a few feet away, leaning casually against a bookshelf. He was dressed impeccably in deep burgundy, a silver pin in the shape of a stylized wolf's head glinting on his collar. His smile was pleasant, but his eyes were like chips of flint. "Lord Varen," I said, the name feeling foreign and dangerous on my tongue. I made to stand, a reflex Mira had drilled in me. "Please, don't rise on my account," he said, waving a dismissive hand. He took a step closer. "I merely wish to welcome you properly to Stonehaven. Our king's sudden acquisition has been the talk of the court, as you can imagine." The word acquisition made me feel like a trinket. I kept my face still, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "The king has been most kind." "Oh, I'm sure he has," Varen purred, his gaze sweeping over my simple blue dress, my unadorned hair. "Lysander has always had a protective streak, a commendable quality in a ruler, though it can sometimes lead to impractical attachments." The insult was veiled, but its edge was sharp. I said nothing, holding his gaze, a trick Mira had drilled in me. "Silence can be a weapon, my lady. Let them fill it." My lack of reaction seemed to irritate him. His smile tightened.
You must find it all so bewildering. The protocols, the politics, the expectations placed on a royal consort. I sigh, a theatrical sound. It is a heavy burden for one so unprepared. A burden that impacts not just you, but the entire kingdom. Alliances are delicate things. They require cementing with bonds of blood and power. He was speaking of his daughter. The unspoken threat was clear. The king seems to believe the moon goddess provides the only bond that matters, I said quietly, repeating Lysander's own words back to him. A spark of defiance, fed by all those quiet breakfasts, flickered to life. Varen's eyes flashed. The goddess works in mysterious ways, child. Sometimes a test is just that, a test, to see if a vessel is strong enough to hold such a sacred gift. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that smelled of mint and malice. Tell me, has your wolf stirred at all since coming here, felt the pull of the full moon, or does she remain shy? The question was a direct strike at my deepest shame. My cheeks heated. I looked down at my hands, the old familiar feeling of inadequacy rising like bile. Seeing his hit land, Varen straightened, his expression of false pity. Ah, I see. A difficult path indeed. Well, I shall leave you to your reading. Do enjoy the view. He gave a shallow, mocking bow and disappeared between the towering bookshelves. I sat there, trembling, the beautiful, stark view outside the window blurred by humiliated tears. He had found my weakest point with surgical precision and prodded it. A vessel. Was I all I was? An empty cup the king was trying to fill? I didn't read another word. When Mira came to fetch me for the evening, she took one look at my face and her own softened with concern. What happened, my lady? Lord Varen, I whispered as we walked the quiet corridors back to my suite. Mira's lips pressed into a thin line. I see, and he spoke of your wolf. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Pay his poison no mind, my lady, she said firmly, but I heard the worry beneath her strength. The king will— I don't want the king to fight every battle for me. The words burst out of me, surprising both of us. I stopped walking, turning to Mira, my hands clenched at my sides. If I am to be significant, I cannot run to him every time someone calls me weak. He has a kingdom to rule. I cannot be another problem for him to solve. Mira studied me for a long moment, a new respect dawning in her eyes. Then, my lady, she said slowly, you must begin to solve it yourself, not with claws you do not yet have, but with the mind you do. You observed him. What did you learn? I thought back. The flinty eyes, the pride, the obsessive focus on bloodlines and power. He's afraid, I realized suddenly. He's not just ambitious. I thought back. The flinty eyes, the pride, the obsessive focus on bloodlines and power. He's afraid, I realized suddenly. He's not just ambitious, he's terrified that my presence ruins his plans, makes him look foolish for betting on the wrong future. His pride is his weakness. A slow smile spread across Mira's face. Very good. Remember that. Knowledge is armor. Now come. The king is dining in the great hall tonight with his captains. He has asked if you would join him. Panic instantly replaced my brief moment of clarity. The Great Hall? A public meal with warriors and high-ranking officials? I can't. You can, and you will, Mira said, gently but firmly. It is a command, but also an honor. He is presenting you to his inner circle. It is time. The Sunstone Suite felt like a prison as Mira helped me into a slightly more formal dress, this one a deep, moonlit blue. She arranged my hair simply, insisting I wear the moonstone pendant. My reflection in the mirror showed a pale, wide-eyed girl playing dress-up, the girl Varen saw.
Kieran came to escort me. The walk to the great hall was the longest of my life. The sounds of masculine voices and clinking cutlery grew louder. The doors, carved with scenes of legendary battles, loomed before me. As they opened, the conversation inside died a sudden death. The great hall was immense, its ceiling lost in shadow. A long table ran its length, lit by massive iron chandeliers. At the head sat Lysander, and arrayed down both sides were 24 of his most trusted warriors and advisors. They were all battle-hardened men, scarred and powerful, and every single one of them was staring at me. Lysander rose. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes found mine, a steady point in the storm of hostile curiosity. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice effortlessly filling the hall, "my intended, Lady Elara." A ripple of murmured "my lady" traveled down the table, but the sentiment behind the words was cold, formal. I saw skepticism, open assessment, and in a few faces outright disapproval. These were men of action, of proven strength. What could I possibly offer their king? Lysander held out a hand, indicating the empty chair to his right, the place of highest honor. Swallowing my terror, I walked forward, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I could feel Varen's gaze from somewhere down the table, burning with cold amusement. I took my seat. The meal resumed, but the atmosphere was strained. The men spoke in low tones of border patrols and training yards, topics that excluded me completely. I was a ghost at the feast, an ornament. I picked at my food, my appetite gone. Then, one of the older captains, a grizzled man with a scar across his bald head, leaned forward. "So, Lady Elara, we hear you're from the Silverfang territory, harsh lands, breeds tough wolves." His tone was challenging. "What was your role there, in the hunts, the patrols?" All side conversations ceased. This was it, the direct challenge. I set my fork down carefully, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could lie, I could try to invent a strength I didn't have, but I met the captain's gaze, and I saw no malice in his eyes, only blunt curiosity. These men valued truth, even hard truth. "My role, Captain," I said, my voice clear despite its tremor, "was in the gardens and the still room. I tended herbs for healing, I prepared poultices for wounds after the hunts you speak of. I learned which plants could ease a fever or clean a gash." I paused, drawing a shaky breath. "I never stood on a patrol line, but I have patched up the wolves who did." A stunned silence followed. They had expected shame, stammering, weakness. They had not expected this quiet, practical account of a different kind of service. The scarred captain blinked, then a slow, grudging nod of respect touched his stern features. "Useful knowledge," he grunted, "lost art for many." It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't dismissal. It was a crack in the wall. From the corner of my eye, I saw Lysander. He was not looking at me, but down at his plate, a faint, unmistakable smile playing on his lips. He had heard my exchange with Varen, I was sure of it. He had known this challenge would come, and he had let me face it, and I had not run. The conversation slowly started again, less tense now. I didn't speak much more, but I listened, really listened to their talk of logistics and terrain. I began to see the kingdom not as a glittering crown, but as a living, breathing entity with borders to protect and people to feed. As the meal ended and the men began to disperse, Lysander leaned towards me, his voice for my ears alone. "Herbs for healing," he murmured, his stormy eyes warm with pride. "You see, you are already serving your kingdom, my lady, in your own way." He rose, offering me his arm. As we walked out, I dared a glance back. Lord Varen was watching us, his earlier amusement gone, replaced with a cold, calculating intensity. The first skirmish was over. I had not triumphed, but I had held my ground. And in the eyes of the king's warriors, and in my own heart, something had shifted. The empty vessel had begun, just barely, to fill. Chapter 8.
Winter tightened its grip on Stonehaven, wrapping the citadel in a deep, crystalline silence. The brief respite I'd felt after the dinner in the Great Hall was short-lived. Lord Varen's public challenge had been a declaration of war in the subtle, vicious language of the court. The opposition was no longer a whispering shadow, it was taking shape. Lady Cordelia became its public face. Where Varen was sly poison, Cordelia was glacial disapproval. She oversaw my instruction in court etiquette with the rigor of a drill sergeant, her criticism a constant, sharp drizzle. Your posture is still that of a scullery maid, girl. Do not look directly into the eyes of a higher-ranking noble unless spoken to. You are not their equal. That gesture is common. A queen is never common. I bore it in silence, storing every barb, every piece of information. Knowledge is armor, Mira said. I was slowly forging mine. Lysander was often absent for days at a time, called to the far reaches of the kingdom to settle disputes or reinforce borders. His absence was a physical ache, a strange hollow pang I had no name for. The mate pole was a constant low hum, a reminder of the tether between us that stretched taut over miles of snow. When he was gone, the court grew bolder. It was during one such absence that Lady Cordelia delivered her masterstroke. She announced a small gathering in the Rose Gallery, an evening of music and conversation for the Citadel's highest-ranking residents. My attendance, she informed me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, is not optional. The court must see you can conduct yourself in civilized company. The king would expect it.
The night arrived. Mira dressed me in a gown of pale lavender silk, the most elaborate garment I'd worn yet. It felt like a costume. The Rose Gallery was a long, breathtaking room where even in winter, enchanted crystals made full-bloomed roses of ice glitter on the walls. It was filled with perhaps 30 people, lords and ladies in glittering finery. The air was thick with perfume and the clink of crystal. I stood near a pillar, trying to mimic Mira's lessons on how to simply be in a room. It was then that I saw her. A young woman, perhaps a year or two older than me, had entered on Lord Varen's arm. She was stunning. Hair the color of spun gold, eyes a clear, piercing blue, and a smile of perfect, practiced charm. She moved with the easy grace of a born predator, her gown of ice blue samite showcasing a figure both powerful and elegant. This was Lady Lyra, Varen's daughter, the queen they had all expected. A hush fell over the room as Varen led her directly toward me. The trap was so obvious it was almost insulting. "Lady Elara," Varen said, his voice oozing false warmth. "Allow me to present my daughter, Lyra. Lyra, this is the king's guest from the Silverfang territories." Lyra's blue eyes swept over me, a quick, dismissive assessment that took in every detail and found it wanting. Her smile was dazzling and utterly cold. "An honor," she said, her voice like chiming bells. "We have all been so curious about you. The Silverfangs are known for their rustic vigor. It must have been a fascinating change to come to Stonehaven." Her tone implied I'd been dragged from a cave. "The citadel is very beautiful," I replied, keeping my voice neutral, "and vast. It can be overwhelming for those unfamiliar with its ways," Lyra said sweetly, sipping from her goblet. "I've been coming here since I was a child. King Lysander used to let me play in the royal gardens. He always said I had the makings of a true Stonehaven wolf." She let the implication hang in the air, a claim of childhood intimacy and royal approval I could never match. The courtiers nearby were listening, their faces masks of polite attention, but their eyes gleamed with anticipation. "I'm sure the gardens are lovely," I said, feeling my grip on composure slip. "Oh, they are, especially the moon pool. It's said only those with a strong, clear connection to their wolf can make the waters shimmer." She leaned in conspiratorially, her smile sharpening. "You must try it while you're here. It's quite a sight. Of course, some simply don't have the gift. The pool remains dark, but it's nothing to be ashamed of." It was a public, elegant evisceration. She had cornered me and, in front of everyone, offered me a test I was guaranteed to fail. The moon pool. I'd heard of it. A sacred, ancient spring in the heart of the royal gardens. A touchstone for wolf power. To try and fail would be a humiliation that would ripple through the entire kingdom. To refuse would brand me a coward. Every eye was on me. I saw Cordelia watching from across the room, a faint, satisfied curve to her lips. Varen's expression was one of benign expectation. My mouth went dry. The old, familiar shame rose, threatening to choke me. I was back in the Silverfang Square, being declared a drudge. I could feel the phantom stares of my former pack. Weak, unwanted. But then another memory surfaced. Lysander's voice, firm and sure across a breakfast table. "She is there. I feel her." And my own voice, shaky but defiant in the library. "I must learn to be significant." I looked at Lyra's perfect, triumphant face. This was what they wanted, for me to crumble, to prove I didn't belong. I took a slow, deep breath, meeting her crystal blue gaze. "The moon pool sounds revealing," I said, my voice gaining a steadiness I didn't feel. "Perhaps you could demonstrate its magic first, Lady Lyra. As someone so familiar with it, and with such a strong, clear connection, I would be most interested to see." A flicker of surprise, then irritation crossed Lyra's flawless features. She had not expected a counter. She had expected cowering acceptance. The invitation had been a snare for me, not for her. Well, the pool's magic is not a party trick," she managed, her smile stiffening. "Of course not," I agreed softly. "It's sacred, so perhaps it's best not to treat it as one, or to pressure a guest into performing like a trained animal for the court's amusement. Don't you agree?" The silence that followed was profound. I had not raised my voice. I had not insulted her. I had simply turned her own trap inside out, exposing its cruelty and disrespect for tradition. A few of the watching nobles exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from amusement to thoughtful surprise. Lyra's cheeks flushed a delicate pink. She had been outmaneuvered with words, not claws. "How quaintly provincial of you to interpret hospitality as pressure," she managed, but the charm was gone from her voice, replaced with a brittle edge. Before she could say more, a new voice cut through the tension, deep and resonant with a power that made the crystal glasses tremble. "I find nothing provincial about respect for our sacred places." Everyone in the gallery turned, then immediately dropped into bows and curtsies. Standing in the arched doorway, cloaked in travel dust and winter chill, was Lysander. He had returned, and he had heard everything. His stormy eyes were like thunderclouds as they swept over the assembly, landing first on a pale Lyra, then on Varen, before finally coming to rest on me. In his gaze, I saw a fury so cold it could freeze fire, and beneath it a pride so fierce it stole my breath. He strode into the room, his presence scattering the tension like a physical force. He did not go to Lyra or Varen. He walked directly to me, stopping before me, then in front of the entire stunned court, he took my hand and raised it to his lips, his eyes never leaving mine. It was a gesture of old-fashioned, unmistakable courtliness, a public declaration of favor more powerful than any words. "My lady," he said, his voice warm for me alone, "I see you have been educating our court in the true meaning of strength. Forgive my tardiness. Some border matters required a firm hand." The message was unmistakable. He had been dealing with threats abroad, and now he was dealing with the ones at home.
He turned, his arms slipping protectively around my waist, tucking me against his side as he faced the room. The king and his chosen, united. "The moon pool," he announced, his voice ringing with finality, "is not a toy. Its waters are for reflection and truth, not petty games. Let that be the end of it." The gathering dissolved quickly after that, the courtiers dispersing with murmured excuses. Cordelia's face was a mask of stone. Back in the sunstone suite, with the door closed, Lysander's regal composure eased. He looked at me, a weary smile touching his lips. "Herbs and healing 1 week, verbal duels the next. You are full of surprises, Elara." "I didn't know what else to do," I confessed, the adrenaline leaving me shaky. "You did exactly what was needed. You stood your ground. You used your mind. You showed them you cannot be bullied." He cupped my face, his thumb brushing my cheek, the touch sending sparks through my entire being. "You shone tonight, not with a wolf's power, but with a queen's courage, and that, my mate, is a far rarer and more dangerous light." He stayed only a little while, drawn away by the duties his unexpected return had created. But after he left, I stood at my window, looking down at the gardens below, now shrouded in night. Somewhere down there was the moon pool, dark and waiting. Lyra's challenge still hung in the air, unanswered. I had won a battle of wits, but the war for my place, for the truth of my own soul, was far from over. They had tried to force me to the water's edge, and soon, I knew, I would have to go there willingly, to face the deepest reflection of all, my own. Chapter 9. The confrontation in the Rose Gallery changed things. It didn't win me friends, but it earned me a wary, begrudging space. The court now knew I would not break easily, and that the king's protection was an active, fierce force. Lysander's public rebuke of Lyra and Varen had drawn a line in the stone of the citadel floor. Yet the victory felt fragile, built on borrowed courage and the king's timely arrival. The true test, I knew, lay within me. The question of my wolf was a shadow that grew longer with each passing day, fed by Lyra's barbed words and my own gnawing doubt. The moon pool remains dark. I found myself drawn to the royal gardens, not the cultivated terraces near the citadel walls, but the wilder, older heart of them, where the sacred pool was said to be. I went alone, without Mira, in the quiet hours of the late afternoon when the light was thin and blue. I didn't approach the pool itself, a circle of perfectly still, black water nestled among ancient, snow-dusted firs. I merely observed it from a distance, feeling the strange, silent pulse of power that emanated from it. It felt both inviting and terrifying. It was on one such afternoon, as I stood shrouded in the shadow of the towering pine, that I heard the voices, hushed, urgent. "Cannot let this farce continue." It was Lord Varen's voice, tight with suppressed rage. "He humiliates my daughter, undermines generations of planning for that?" "Patience, Varen." The response was the cool, measured tone of Lady Cordelia. "The king's infatuation is strong, but it is new. It is built on a mystical pull, not political sense. Infatuations fade, especially when reality intrudes." "And what reality is that?" Varen snapped. "She hasn't shifted. She has no allies. She is a mouse in a den of wolves. We could arrange for reality to be unforgiving." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air seized me. I pressed deeper into the shadows, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Do not be a fool," Cordelia hissed, her voice dropping even lower. "Direct action against her while she's under his direct protection would be suicide. Lysander would tear the kingdom apart to find the culprit, and he would. No, we work with the tools we have, tradition, expectation, and her own inadequacy." "What are you suggesting?"
"The lunar conclave," Cordelia said, and I could hear the cunning smile in her voice. "It is in 6 weeks' time. All the alphas and their heirs come to Stonehaven to renew their oaths. It is the most sacred political gathering of the year. The king's mate is always presented. It is a moment of profound symbolism, the strength of the royal line, the promise of the future. And she will be a laughingstock," Varen finished, a note of cruel understanding dawning. "A human-born with no wolf, standing before the most powerful wolves in the kingdom as their queen-to-be. It won't just humiliate her, it will undermine Lysander's judgment in front of everyone who matters. His authority could be shaken to its core." "Precisely," Cordelia purred. "We simply must ensure she is unprepared. Isolate her. Let the pressure of the coming event fray her nerves. Let her feel the weight of the crown she cannot possibly bear. And if, by some miracle, she does find her wolf before then," Varen asked, his voice uneasy. Cordelia's laugh was a soft, bitter sound. "Do you truly believe that possible? The Silverfangs are no fools. If there was a wolf in her, even a latent one, they would have scented it, drawn it out. No, Varen, she is a void, and at the conclave, in front of the full moon and every alpha, that void will be all anyone can see. The king's choice will be revealed as a catastrophic error, and the path to a suitable queen will reopen." Their footsteps crunched on the frozen path, moving away. I remained frozen long after their voices had faded, the cold from the tree trunk seeping into my bones. The lunar conclave. I had heard of it in hushed, reverent tones, a gathering of raw power and ancient ritual, and they intended to use it as my execution block, not with claws, but with disgrace. The weight they spoke of settled on my shoulders, heavier than any cloak. I wasn't just fighting for a place beside Lysander anymore. I was fighting for his kingdom, for his right to rule. My failure wouldn't just mean my own exile. It could trigger a crisis that could break the realm apart. Trembling, I finally pushed away from the tree and hurried back to the citadel, their plot coiling in my mind like a serpent. I needed to tell Lysander. He had to know. But when I reached his private study, Kieran stood guard outside, his face grim. "He is in council, my lady, a dispute from the Howling Crag territory. It may be ours." "I need to speak with him. It's urgent." Kieran's expression softened with something akin to pity. "He knows the court schemes, my lady. He is not blind, but the kingdom's business cannot wait. You must be strong a little longer." Be strong. The words felt like a sentence. I turned away, the urgency in my chest turning to a cold, hard lump of dread. I was on my own. That night, for the first time, I dreamed not of Silverfang, but of the moon pool. In the dream, I stood at its edge, looking down. The water was not black, but a swirling, liquid silver, mirror bright. My reflection was clear, but it was not just me. Overlaying my face, faint and shimmering, was the visage of a magnificent she-wolf with fur the color of moonlight and eyes that held the storm of 1,000 winters. Our eyes met in the water, and a feeling of immense, ancient power surged through me, a longing so sharp it was pain. I woke with a gasp, my skin tingling, the phantom sensation of fur and fangs lingering for a heartbeat before fading, leaving only the familiar, aching emptiness. It was the most vivid, most real sensation of my wolf I had ever had, and it was just a dream, a cruel, beautiful dream. The next morning, hollow-eyed from restless sleep, I went to our solar breakfast. Lysander was already there, poring over maps, the lines of fatigue etched deep around his eyes. He looked up as I entered, and the automatic warm light that usually sparked in his gaze when he saw me was dimmed by worry. "Elara, sit. You look pale."
I overheard something, I blurted out, unable to hold it in. I told him everything, Cordelia and Varen's conversation, their plan for the lunar conclave, their intention to use my perceived weakness to destabilize his rule. He listened in silence, his expression growing darker, stormier with every word. When I finished, he didn't rage. He simply sat back, steepling his fingers, a predator calculating a threat. I know of their plans, he said finally, his voice low and deadly calm. Kieran has ears in places they do not suspect. The conclave was always going to be a test, but to use it so blatantly as a weapon, a muscle ticked in his jaw. They grow desperate. What do we do? I whispered, feeling small and hopeless. He reached across the table, covering my cold hand with his warm, calloused one. We prepare, not for their game, but for ours. His eyes held mine, the storm in them now one of fierce determination. For 6 weeks, you will not just learn court manners, you will learn the history of every alpha who will attend, their territories, their strengths, their grudges. You will learn the rituals of the conclave until you can perform them in your sleep. You will become so steeped in the tradition and politics of this kingdom that they cannot claim you are an ignorant outsider. But my wolf, the old shameful cry tore from me. Your wolf is not a political tool, he said, his grip tightening. She is a part of you. She will come when she is ready, and not a moment before. We will not play their game by their rules. You will face the conclave not as a wolf, but as a queen, with knowledge, with grace, with a spine of steel. Let them whisper about your shift. You will speak to them of border treaties and harvest yields. You will show them a different kind of strength, one that does not need fangs to command a room. His words were a battle plan. He was asking me to fight a war unarmed, using my mind as my only weapon. The task seemed Herculean. I don't know if I can do, I confessed, the fear raw in my voice. He stood, coming around the table to kneel beside my chair, just as he had in the Silverfang Square. He took both my hands in his. Elara, look at me. You faced down your entire pack. You faced down Varen and Lyra in a room full of vipers. You have a strength you do not yet see. I see it. It is the strength of the deep root that survives the harshest winter. Trust me, trust yourself. For the next 6 weeks, I will be your shield and your guide, but you, my mate, must be the sword. The conviction in his eyes, the absolute faith, was a kind of magic. It poured into the cracks of my fear, filling them with something solid, something like resolve. The lunar conclave was no longer a distant event. It was a cliff I was racing toward, and Cordelia and Varen were waiting at the bottom, ready to watch me fall. But I would not fall alone, and I would not go unarmed. I would go armed with the knowledge of a king and the fragile, burgeoning courage of a queen who was just beginning to discover she had a will of iron beneath her silken gown. The battle for the throne had begun, and I, the girl with no wolf, was now standing on the front line. Chapter 10. The citadel became a fortress of a different kind, not of stone, but of relentless, grueling preparation. Lysando's promise to be my guide was no idle one. Our morning meals in the solar transformed into intense strategy sessions. Maps were replaced by sprawling genealogical charts and dense historical treatises. This, Lysander would say, tapping a name with a firm finger, is Alpha Thorin of the Ironwood Pack. His territory borders the disputed Silverflow River. He is stubborn as bedrock and values blunt honesty above flowery words. If he challenges you, look him directly in the eye and answer in one sentence. Do not waver. I absorbed it all. The names and alliances and ancient feuds became a living tapestry in my mind. Mira helped me memorize the intricate ceremonial steps of the conclave's opening ritual, the approach to the moonstone. Kieran, to my surprise, began joining some sessions, drilling me on the military strengths and vulnerabilities of each territory, his stern face betraying a flicker of approval when I correctly recalled the number of warriors the Howling Crag could field. It was exhausting. My head ached with names. My dreams were filled with shifting political allegiances instead of silver wolves. But with every mastered fact, every nuance understood, the paralyzing fear of the conclave began to morph into a sharp, focused anxiety. I was no longer a passive victim walking toward a trap. I was a student preparing for the most important examination of my life. The court, sensing the shift, changed its tactics. The open mockery ceased. Instead, I was met with a wall of exquisite, icy politeness. Invitations to trivial social events multiplied, each one a potential minefield of subtle insults or leading questions. Cordelia, in her role as head of household, generously provided me with a flood of historical documents to review, often incomplete or misleadingly copied, forcing me to cross-reference everything with Lysander or the library's authentic texts. It was a war of attrition, designed to overwhelm and isolate me. The only respite was my secret, stolen moments in the wild part of the gardens, always keeping a respectful distance from the silent, dark circle of the moon pool. The dream of the silver wolf never repeated, but the memory of it was a quiet ember in my chest, a whispered promise I was too afraid to hope in.
3 weeks into our preparation, the first real strike came from an unexpected quarter. I was in the library, cross-checking a disputed border claim from Cordelia's documents, when a young, timid-looking maid approached me. She was not one of Mira's. She curtsied, her hands shaking as she held out a small, folded parchment. "For you, my lady, from the kitchens. They said it was urgent." Puzzled, I took it. The parchment was cheap, the wax seal unmarked. I broke it and read the few clumsily scrawled lines inside. "Elara, it's Celine. I'm at the lower gatehouse. The Silverfang sent me with a message from your old Alpha. It's about your parents. Come alone, or you'll never know the truth. Tell no one." My blood turned to ice. Celine? Here? And a message about my parents? They had died in a border skirmish when I was a child. The pack had told me little, and I had always been too afraid to ask for more. A desperate, hungry curiosity, long buried, clawed its way to the surface. The truth. It was a trap. Every instinct screamed it. Celine hated me. This reeked of Cordelia and Varen's cunning, using my deepest, most personal vulnerability against me. If I went, I'd be walking into their hands, violating Lysander's trust, proving myself impulsive and foolish. If I didn't go, the thought of a secret about my parents, forever lost, was a physical pain. I sat there, the note crumpling in my fist. This was the reality Cordelia had spoken of intruding, a test not of knowledge, but of heart, of loyalty. I found Lysander in his war room, deep in discussion with Kieran and his border captains. I waited at the edge of the room, the note a burning coal in my hand. He dismissed the others with a look and came to me, concern immediately etching his features. "What is it?" Wordlessly, I handed him the note. He read it, his expression hardening into something dangerous. "No," he said flatly. "It is a ploy, a childishly obvious one. Kieran will detain this Celine, and we will find out who in my citadel facilitated this." "But my parents," I whispered, the words tearing from a wounded place. He cupped my face, his touch grounding me. "Elara,
If there was truth about your parents, do you think Ronan would send Selene, of all people, to deliver it? This is meant to lure you, to make you act against your own interests, to prove you are not yet a queen, but a frightened girl ruled by sentiment. His eyes searched mine. What does your mind tell you? Not your heart, your mind. I closed my eyes, forcing down the surge of emotion. I thought of Celine's hatred in the square, of Cordelia's cold calculations, of Varen's ambition. I saw the pieces, clumsy and desperate. "It's a trap," I said, my voice gaining strength. "They want me to disobey you, to sneak out. They'd find me compromised, communicating secretly with a hostile pack member. It would destroy my credibility days before the conclave." A slow, proud smile spread across Lysander's face. "Exactly. So, what is the Queen's move?" I took a deep, steadying breath. The hungry, grieving child inside me wanted to run to that gatehouse. The woman I was becoming, the one he believed in, saw a different path. "The Queen," I said, meeting his stormy gaze, "sends her king's most trusted captain to the lower gatehouse to formally and publicly receive any message from the Silverfang pack, and to remind them that all communications for the king's intended go through official channels, and then the Queen returns to her studies." The pride in his eyes was a brighter warmth than any fire. "Kieran," he called, without looking away from me. "At once," Kieran said, a note of unmistakable respect in his voice as he bowed and strode out. Lysander pulled me into a brief, fierce embrace. It was not a lover's embrace, but one of solidarity, of shared victory. "You see," he murmured into my hair, "you are learning. They attack your heart, and you answer with your crown." The trap was sprung, but not on me. Kieran returned an hour later, reporting that Selene had fled the moment she saw him approaching with a full guard detail. The message was, of course, non-existent. The attempt, however, had revealed a junior guardsman in Varen's pocket, who was promptly reassigned to a remote watchtower. The incident became a quiet legend among the servants and the guard. The mouse had not taken the cheese. She had sent a cat to investigate. My stock within the Citadel's non-noble ranks rose imperceptibly. But the victory was bittersweet. That night, alone in the Sunstone suite, the grief for my parents, for the truth I might never know, washed over me in a cold wave. I cried, silent tears soaking my pillow. I was learning to be a queen, but the cost felt like pieces of my own soul. As I lay there, spent, a strange sensation bloomed in my chest. Not the mate pull, but something deeper, older, a faint, silvery warmth, like the memory of moonlight on water. It pulsed once, softly, a gentle internal radiance that eased the ache in my heart for just a moment before fading away, leaving behind not emptiness, but a quiet, steady thrum of presence. I sat up, pressing a hand to my chest, my breath caught. Had I imagined it? Was it just wishful thinking? I didn't know, but for the first time the void inside me didn't feel quite so empty. It felt waiting, and as I looked toward the gardens, toward the unseen moon pool, I felt not fear, but a strange, solemn sense of purpose. The conclave was coming, and I would face it not just with the mind of a queen or the heart of a daughter, but with the first fragile whisper of something else entirely, something that was and had always been my own. Chapter 11. The final week before the lunar conclave settled over Stonehaven like a held breath. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a low, anticipatory hum, thick with the scent of pine resin, polished metal, and the ozone tang of gathering wolf power. The Citadel, always bustling, became a hive of frantic, silent activity. tapestries were beaten, silver was polished to blinding brightness, and the great hall was transformed for the feast of a millennium. My lessons with Lysander intensified, but their nature shifted. We were done with names and maps. Now we practiced presence. "You will not just listen to your words," he told me, standing before me in a quiet antechamber. "They will scent your fear, your uncertainty. They will feel the energy you project. You must own the space you stand in." He circled me, a critical, loving eye missing nothing. "Your posture is better, but it is still a posture. It must become your truth. You are not playing a queen, Elara. You are becoming one." He had me stand for hours, a book balanced on my head, not for the silly trick of it, but to teach my body a new, centered alignment. He had me stand for hours, a book balanced on my head, not for the silly trick of it, but to teach my body a new, centered alignment. He drilled me on the modulation of my voice, how to project calm authority without raising it, how to make a room lean in to listen. He taught me the art of the pause, the power of a steady, unwavering gaze. It was grueling. My muscles ached from stillness. My mind felt scraped raw from the constant self-scrutiny. But beneath the exhaustion, the silvery warmth in my chest, that faint echo of the moon pool dream remained. It didn't grow, but it didn't fade. It was a companion in the silence, a private reassurance. The morning of the conclave's eve dawned clear and bitterly cold. This was the day the alphas would begin arriving. Lysander was needed at the gates for the formal reception of the first and most important delegations. Before he left, he came to my suite. He was clad in full ceremonial armor, black plate etched with silver runes, the obsidian and platinum crown resting on his brow. He looked like a god of war and winter, utterly magnificent and utterly terrifying. He took my hands, his own encased in cool metal. "Today you observe from the upper ramparts with Mira," he instructed, his voice solemn. "Watch how they enter, note who arrives with whom, see the alliances in their formation, feel the weight of their power as it gathers. Immerse yourself in it, do not fear it. It is the music you will soon learn to conduct." He lifted my hands and pressed a firm, lingering kiss to my knuckles, his stormy eyes holding mine. "Remember the root, Elara, deep, unshakable. I believe in you." Then he was gone, the echo of his armored footsteps fading down the corridor. His absence felt like a physical removal of the atmosphere. The suite was just a room, and I was just a girl. Mira arrived, her face set in lines of calm determination. She dressed me in a gown of deep, starless night blue, simple and severe, with a high neck and long sleeves. "No distractions, my lady," she said, fastening the final clasp. "Today you are a shadow, an observer, but a shadow the king has chosen. Remember that." From the high, wind-whipped ramparts, hidden behind a carved stone screen, I watched the arrival of kings, or rather of alphas who were kings in their own territories. They came in all their fierce, varied glory. Alpha Thorin of the Ironwood was first, just as Lysander had said, a mountain of a man with a bristling russet beard, arriving on a massive, shaggy dire bear instead of a horse, his warriors stomping in unison behind him. Then came the sleek, dangerous-looking contingent from the Mistfall pack, their alpha, a severe woman named Isolde, moving with a panther's silent grace. Delegation after delegation poured through the gates, a river of fur, leather, steel, and raw, barely leashed power. I watched as Lysander had instructed. I saw Thorin clasp forearms with Lysander with a grin that didn't reach his wary eyes. I saw Isolde offer a cool, precise bow.
I saw the younger alphas, like the fiery-haired one from the Emberhold, sizing up their king and the citadel with restless ambition, and I saw Lord Varen and Lady Cordelia moving among them like elegant ghosts, greeting, whispering, their eyes occasionally flicking up toward the ramparts where they knew I watched. The weight Lysander spoke of was real. It pressed on the air, a composite force of pride, aggression, curiosity, and ancient rivalry. It was a living, breathing beast gathering in the courtyard below, and in 2 days' time, I was to stand before it. As the last delegation was welcomed, a commotion erupted at the gate. A group clad in familiar, rough-spun gray and black entered. The Silver Fang. Alpha Ronin led them, his face a mask of strained deference, and beside him, her beautiful face set in a smile of poisonous sweetness, was Selene. She looked around the citadel with wide, covetous eyes that quickly turned calculating. My stomach twisted. Seeing them here, in this place that was slowly becoming mine, felt like a violation. It was a reminder of the girl in the threadbare shawl, of the public rejection. That girl felt 1,000,000 miles away, and yet their presence threatened to drag her back. Then, something strange happened. As Ronin bowed before Lysander, Selene's gaze, sharp as a dagger, swept the ramparts. She couldn't see me behind the screen, but she looked right at my hiding place, as if she could smell my lingering scent on the wind. Her smile widened, and she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, not of greeting, but of promise. I am here. This isn't over. A cold that had nothing to do with the mountain wind seeped into my bones. That evening, there was no private meal. The great hall echoed with the roars of 100 alphas and their retinues, a cacophony of competing voices and laughter. From a secluded balcony above, hidden by a curtain, I watched the feast. I saw Lysander at the high table, playing the perfect host, his laughter easy but his eyes missing nothing. I saw Varen holding court at a lower table, Lyra at his side, shining like a cold jewel, receiving admiring glances from several younger alphas. I saw Selene seated far below with the Silver Fang, her eyes rarely leaving Lysander, burning with a possessive hunger that turned my blood to ice. This was the world I was to join, a world of teeth and ambition, where every smile hid a snarl, every toast veiled a threat. Later, long after the hall had quieted, I couldn't sleep. The silvery warmth in my chest was agitated, pulsing in time with my anxious heart. Driven by a need I couldn't name, I slipped from my room, pulling a plain cloak over my nightdress. I didn't go to the gardens. I went higher, to the oldest part of the citadel, the abandoned bell tower that overlooked the entire mountain valley. The wind here was a living thing, howling through the open stone arches. The moon, just a day from full, hung huge and luminous in the black velvet sky, bathing the world in spectral silver light. Below, the citadel slept, and beyond, the mountains were teeth of bone. I stood at the edge, the wind tearing at my hair and cloak, and I let the immensity of it all crash over me. The power, the expectation, the hatred, the love, the terrifying, beautiful responsibility. The fear rose up, a black tide threatening to drown me. I can't do this. I'm not enough. I will fail him. I will fail everyone. But as the fear peaked, the silvery warmth in my chest flared, not violently, but with a sudden profound clarity. It wasn't just warmth, it was a voice. Not with words, but with pure sensation, a feeling of immense patience, of ancient watchfulness, of strength that was not about muscle, but about endurance, the strength of the moon itself, constant through every cycle, unchanging in its purpose. In that moment, I wasn't Elara the weak, or Elara the king's burden. I was simply a point of awareness under the moon, connected to something vast and timeless. The terror didn't vanish, but it shrank, put into perspective by the infinite sky. I didn't know if it was my wolf, the goddess, or just my own desperate soul finding a reserve of courage. It didn't matter.
I closed my eyes, turned my face to the moon, and let its light wash over me. When I opened them, I was calm. The root was deep. The storm would come, and I would bend, but I would not break. Unseen by me, from a dark window in the royal wing, a pair of storm-cloud eyes watched the small, solitary figure standing fearless in the wind and moonlight. And the king, his heart a tumult of fear and fierce pride, allowed himself a single, unwavering thought: mine. Chapter 12. The day of the lunar conclave dawned with a silence so profound it felt sacred. The usual morning sounds of the citadel were absent, replaced by a tense, waiting hush. Today was not for feasts or politics. Today was for the moon. Mira woke me before first light. There was no elaborate gown today. She helped me into a simple, unbleached linen shift, the traditional garment for the rite of the moonstone. It was plain, almost severe, leaving my arms and feet bare. My hair was brushed out and left loose down my back. No jewelry, no adornments. Before the moon goddess, all were equal. All were laid bare. "The king will come for you at the 7th bell," Mira said, her hands steady on my shoulders. "You remember the steps?" I nodded, the ritual sequence engraved in my mind from weeks of repetition. The silent walk through the citadel, the procession to the sacred grove where the moonstone stood, the approach, the oath, the acknowledgement. "Remember your center, my lady," Mira whispered, her eyes bright. "Remember the root." The 7th bell tolled, its deep bronze note vibrating through the stone floor. A moment later, a knock sounded. Not Kieran, Lysander himself. He too was dressed in the plain linen trousers and tunic of the rite, his crown absent. He looked younger, more approachable, but the authority in him was innate, woven into his very bones. His stormy eyes swept over me, and for a fleeting moment, the mask of the king fell away, revealing the man beneath, awed, anxious, fiercely protective. "You are ready," he stated, offering his arm not in courtly fashion, but as an equal, a partner. "I am," I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. We walked in silence through the emptied corridors. At the citadel's main doors, the assembled alphas and their designated heirs waited, also clad in simple linen, a sea of the most powerful beings in the kingdom, stripped of their regalia, their faces solemn. As Lysander and I appeared, every eye turned to us. The air thickened with their collective focus, a pressure that was heavy and strangely clarifying. I saw Ronan, his jaw tight, Celine beside him, her beautiful face pale with what I realized was not just cold, but a seething, impotent rage. I saw Varen and Cordelia, their expressions impeccably reverent, but their eyes cold as gravestones. I saw Alpha Thorin watching me with blunt curiosity, and Alpha Isolde with her sharp, assessing gaze. Lysander led the way, and I walked a half step behind him, as was tradition for the mate during the approach. We walked through the gates, across the moon bridge, and down a winding pine needle path into the oldest part of the royal forest. The only sounds were the crunch of frost underfoot and the sigh of the wind in the towering firs. The sacred grove was a natural cathedral. Ancient trees formed a perfect circle around a clearing where a monolithic slab of pure, white moonstone rested on a dais of dark rock. The early morning light, filtered through the branches, fell on it in dappled patterns. It hummed with a low, sub-audible power that resonated in my teeth. The alphas filed into the circle, forming a ring around the stone. Lysander took his place before the dais. My place, as his intended, was 3 paces behind and to his right. I took it, folding my hands before me, focusing on my breathing, on the solid ground beneath my bare feet. The silvery warmth in my chest was a steady pulse now, in time with the stone's silent song. The ritual began. Lysander's voice rang out, strong and clear, reciting the ancient words of renewal, reaffirming his oath to protect the kingdom, to uphold the laws of the moon. Each alpha, in turn, stepped forward, placed a hand on the moonstone, and pledged their loyalty. It was mesmerizing, a raw transfer of power and promise that made the very air shimmer. Then came the moment, the acknowledgement, the part of the ritual where the king's mate, if he had one, was presented to the moonstone and to the gathered alphas. It was a blessing, a seeking of the goddess's favor for the royal line. Before the impartial eye of the moon, Lysander intoned, turning to face me. His gaze was a command and a plea. I present my heart, my balance, my chosen mate, Elara. Every fiber of my being was aware of the hundreds of eyes on me. This was it, the moment Cordelia and Varen had banked on, the human-born, the weak one, stepping into the most sacred space in the werewolf world. I walked forward, the frosty grass cold under my feet. I could feel Celine's glare like a physical push. I stopped before the moonstone. Up close, it was even more breathtaking, seeming to hold captured moonlight within its depths. The ritual required me to place my palm upon the stone and speak the words of the mate. My voice felt small in the vast silence of the grove. I stand before the moon, I began, the words I memorized falling from my lips. With an open heart, I pledge my faith to my mate, my strength to his reign, my life to the unity of the kingdom. And as I spoke the final word, I pressed my palm flat against the moonstone. Nothing happened. For one heartbeat, two, the stone remained inert, just cool, polished rock under my hand. A ripple of tension went through the ring of alphas. I saw Cordelia's lips twitch. Varen's eyes gleamed with triumph. Celine let out a soft, barely audible sound of satisfaction. See, the silence screamed. The void, the goddess rejects her. A crushing wave of despair threatened to buckle my knees. This was the failure they had wanted. Public, absolute, sacred. But then, the silvery warmth in my chest, which had been a quiet companion, suddenly unfurled. It wasn't a shift, it was an eruption of light from within. A radiant, gentle, but undeniable silver glow emanated from my skin, from my very core. It wasn't the fierce blaze of a warrior's shift, but the soft, persistent luminescence of moonlight itself. And the moonstone answered. A corresponding glow ignited deep within the monolithic slab. It grew, spreading from the point under my palm, flowing through the veins of the stone like liquid starfire, until the entire monolith was blazing with a soft, brilliant, silvery white light. The hum became a clear, pure note that vibrated in the air, in the ground, in our bones. Gasps, real and unfiltered, erupted from the alphas. Not of disdain, but of awe. The light from the stone reached out, not to Lysander, but to me. It wrapped around me in shimmering tendrils, not burning, but blessing. In that luminous embrace, I felt a recognition so profound it brought tears to my eyes. The goddess was not rejecting me, she was revealing me. My strength was not of tooth and claw, but of constancy, of heart, of a light that could ignite the ancient stones of the world. The light slowly faded from the stone and from my skin, leaving the grove in a stunned, reverent silence. The moonstone's surface, where my hand had been, now held a faint, permanent imprint of a soft, radiant glow, a mark of acknowledgement. I lowered my hand and turned to face the circle. My eyes found Lysander's first. In them, I saw not surprise, but a vindication so deep it was a form of worship. He had always known. I then let my gaze sweep the alphas. Their expressions were transformed. Thorin's was one of shocked respect. Isolde's sharp eyes were wide with re-evaluation. Ronan looked utterly bewildered, as if the world had flipped on its axis. Celine's face was a mask of stunned, livid horror. Varen and Cordelia looked as if they had been carved from ice, their plans, their certainties, shattered by a light they could never have comprehended. Lysander's voice broke the silence, filled with a triumphant, solemn power. "The moon has spoken. She is acknowledged." He stepped forward, not as a king to a subject, but as a mate to his equal. He took my hand, the one that had touched the stone, and lifted it high for all to see. No words were needed. The evidence was etched on light upon the sacred stone and humming in the awed air of the grove. The conclave was not over, but the battle for my place was. I had not needed fangs. I had needed only to be exactly what I was, and in doing so, before the eyes of the entire kingdom, I had been blessed by the moon herself. The void they had seen was not emptiness. It was a vessel, waiting to be filled with a different kind of power, and now it overflowed. Chapter 13. The return from the sacred grove was a silent, seismic shift. The alphas no longer looked at me with open skepticism or veiled contempt. Their gazes held a new, heavy weight, awe, curiosity, and for some, a dawning fear. The moonstone's light had not just acknowledged me, it had rewritten the rules of the game. I was no longer an upstart to be tolerated or removed. I was a fact, sanctified by the oldest power they knew. Lysander's hand on mine was firm, possessive, and pulsing with a quiet, fierce joy. He did not speak as we led the procession back to the citadel, but the communication between us was a tangible thing in the cold air, a shared, triumphant current. The conclave's political sessions began that afternoon, in the great hall. This was the true crucible. Here, alphas argued over borders, tithes, and treaties. Here, Lysander's authority would be tested not by ritual, but by the gritty reality of rule. And now, for the first time, his intended mate had a seat at the high table beside him. I was dressed now in a gown of the same soft silver that had glowed from my skin, a subtle reminder. My hair was simply braided. I took my seat, my back straight, the memory of the moonstone's warmth a steady anchor in my chest. The silvery hum was quieter now, a contented vibration, like a purr. The hall was packed. The air smelled of wolf, smoke fire, and tension. Lysander called the session to order, his voice cutting through the murmurs. The first matters were mundane, disputes over hunting rights, complaints about trade routes disrupted by early snows. Lysander listened, adjudicated with a sharp, fair intelligence. I listened too, not as a bystander, but as a student of the kingdom's heartbeat, using the knowledge he had drilled into me to follow every nuance. Then, Alpha Ronan rose. The hall quieted. All knew the history between my old pack and the king's choice. "Your Majesty," Ronan began, his voice gruff, "the Silver Fang pack brings a grievance. The tithe from the northern silver mines, as set by your father's treaty, is based on the strength of the pack guarding them. For generations, we have been counted among the strongest." He paused, his eyes flickering to me, then back to Lysander. "Recent events have called that strength into question in the eyes of some. We seek reassurance, and a reaffirmation of our standing, and a fairness of our burden." It was a clever, venomous move. He wasn't attacking me directly, he was using me to attack his own pack's standing, positioning my perceived former weakness as a potential justification for the crown to punish them. He was making me a liability to my own people, painting Lysander as a king who would let personal attachment undermine ancient treaties. A ripple of interest went through the room. Varen leaned forward, a satisfied glint in his eye. Lysander's voice broke the silence, filled with a triumphant, solemn power. "The treaty stands, Alpha Ronan. The strength of a pack is not judged by a single member, but by the whole. Your warriors are still among the fiercest. Your tithe is fair." But Ronan pressed, a desperate gambit. "With respect, Your Majesty, perception is its own reality. If the mate of the king is seen as a symbol of diminished strength, it reflects on the pack that reared her.
Some might say we are due consideration. He was begging for a reward for having produced me, while simultaneously insulting me. The audacity took my breath away. I felt Lysander's fury like a gathering storm next to me. He was about to speak, to crush Ronan, but that would look like a king defending his mate's honor over pack law, exactly what Ronan wanted. Before Lysander could utter a word, I spoke. My voice, clear and calm, rang in the hushed hall. Alpha Ronan. Every head swiveled to me. I saw Celine stiffen, her eyes wide with shock that I would dare. I kept my gaze level on Ronan. You speak of the strength of the whole and of perception. When you stood in your square on New Year's Eve and declared me a drudge, you perceived weakness. You cast out a part of your whole. The moon goddess, however, perceives differently. She saw fit to bless what you discarded. Does her perception not outweigh yours? If her blessing on me is a diminishment of Silverfang, then you are saying the goddess herself has weakened you. Is that the grievance you bring before your king? A grievance against the moon.
The hall was so silent I could hear the crackle of the great fire. Ronan's face went from flushed to ashen. I had trapped him with his own logic. To complain further was to blaspheme. I had not defended myself. I had simply reframed the entire argument in a light that made his position not just politically unwise, but sacrilegiously arrogant. Lysander's shoulder, pressed lightly against mine, relaxed a fraction. A faint, proud exhale escaped him. Ronan opened his mouth, closed it, then gave a stiff, shallow bow. The Silver Fang withdraws the query. The treaty stands. He sat down heavily, avoiding everyone's eyes. A subtle, approving murmur traveled through the hall, notably from the older, more traditional alphas like Thorin. I had not fought with emotion, but with theology and reason, a queen's weapons. But the challenges were not over. Lord Varen saw his ally falter and stepped into the fray himself, rising with smooth elegance. "A masterful point, my lady," he said, his tone dripping with false honey. "It settles the matter of the past most poetically, but the conclave looks to the future, the royal line. Strength must be passed on. The blessing of the moon is one thing, the practicalities of succession are another." He turned his cold eyes to Lysander. "Your Majesty, the kingdom rejoices in your found mate, but wolves are creatures of flesh and blood, of legacy. When may the alphas expect the assurance of a strong heir to secure the future?" It was the most dangerous question yet. It cut to the heart of every fear about me. It wasn't about my worth as a mate, but my capability as a mother of future kings, my biology, my wolf. The one thing I could not prove, could not summon on command. A hot flush of shame crept up my neck. Lysander's voice was a low growl of warning. "The practicalities of succession, Varen, are a matter for the king and his mate, not a subject for public debate." "With the greatest respect, Your Majesty," Varen pressed, spreading his hands in a gesture of reason, "the stability of the kingdom is every alpha's concern. Uncertainty breeds unrest. A simple question of timeline would soothe many worries." His gaze slid to me, probing for weakness. "Surely my lady understands the natural anxieties." All eyes were on me again. The hall waited. This was a trap no play of words could easily escape. If I showed uncertainty, I validated their fears. If I made a promise I couldn't keep, I set a timer on my own failure. The silvery warmth in my chest tightened not in fear, but in defiance. I looked at Varen, then slowly let my gaze travel over the assembled alphas, meeting as many eyes as I could. When I spoke, my voice carried not just in the hall, but seemed to resonate with that same deep, silent hum from the grove. "The moon goddess," I said, each word deliberate, "who sets the tides and guides the cycles of life, does not operate on the timelines of anxious men." I turned my head slightly toward Lysander, my expression softening from regal steel to something more intimate, yet no less powerful. My king and I are bound by her will. Our future, and the future of this kingdom, will unfold as she decrees. It is not a matter for schedules or demands. It is a matter for faith, the same faith you all placed in the stone this morning when it glowed. If you have faith in her blessing, then you must have faith in her timing. To do otherwise is not just anxiety, Lord Varen, it is doubt in the goddess herself. I had done it again, turned a personal, biological challenge into a matter of sacred faith. I had placed Varen and anyone who agreed with him on the wrong side of the divine. The hall was utterly still. Varen looked as if he had swallowed a live coal. He could not argue without echoing Ronin's near blasphemy. He gave a stiff, seething bow and sat down, defeated. Lysander did not smile, but as he called for the next matter, his hand found mine under the table. His fingers laced through mine, and he gave a single fierce squeeze. It said everything. Well done, my queen, my love. The rest of the session passed in a blur. I had faced the two greatest attacks they could muster, from my past and against my future, and I had not just survived, I had prevailed, not with a wolf's snarl, but with a queen's unshakable conviction. As the session adjourned, Alpha Isolde approached the high table. She ignored Lysander for a moment and looked directly at me, her sharp eyes assessing. After a long moment, she gave a single, slow nod of respect, deeper than any she had offered before. "You have a rare strength, my lady," she said, her voice like gravel. "The quiet kind, the kind that wins wars without drawing a blade." Then she turned to Lysander. "Your Majesty, the Mistfall Pack's loyalty is to the crown, a crown that seems to be in capable hands." It was the closest thing to an endorsement I could have hoped for. As she walked away, I felt the shift solidify. I was no longer just the king's controversial mate. I was Elara, who had been blessed by the moon, and who had faced down the alphas in their own den. The path ahead was still shrouded in mist, but the ground under my feet at last felt solid, and for the first time I dared to believe it was ground I was meant to stand upon. Chapter 14. The final night of the lunar conclave was a celebration, but the atmosphere in the great hall was charged with a new and different energy. The raw political tension had been transmuted into a buzzing, wary respect. I was no longer a ghost at the feast. I was its reluctant, central figure. Lysander had insisted I wear a gown of moonstone white silk, a visual echo of the grove. It was elegant, but not ostentatious. As we entered the hall, the conversations didn't halt. They softened, and eyes followed us with a mix of curiosity and a strange, reluctant reverence. The light from the stone was a story everyone had told and retold, growing brighter with each telling. We took our places at the high table. The feast was a roaring success, but my attention was fragmented. I was acutely aware of Celine, sitting far below with the Silverfang contingent. She was drinking heavily, her beautiful face growing flushed, her laughter too sharp, and her eyes constantly straying to Lysander with a bruised, possessive hunger that curdled into something darker each time she looked at me. It was during a lively, drum-driven dance that the fragile peace shattered. Lysander had been pulled into a discussion with Alpha Thorin and Isolde. Mira was nearby, speaking with a senior handmaiden. I stood slightly apart near a column, sipping water, allowing myself a moment to simply observe the vibrant, chaotic scene. A shadow fell over me. The scent of fermented berry wine and bitter flowers washed over my senses, cloying and aggressive. "Enjoying your triumph?" Celine stood before me, swaying slightly. Her eyes were glassy, her smile a brittle, dangerous thing. "The little mouse in the queen's clothes, the goddess's pet." "Celine," I said, keeping my voice low and even, "this is not the place." "Oh, but it's the perfect place," she hissed, taking a step closer. The music was loud, masking our conversation from most. "Everyone can see the great, blessed Elara, but I see you. I see the nothing you are. That light was a trick, a fluke. He's bespelled, I tell you."
Her voice rose, drawing a few glances from nearby courtiers. "You're drunk," I stated calmly, though my heart began to pound. "Go back to your table. Don't shame your alpha further." The word shame was a spark to tinder. Her face contorted with rage. "You speak of shame, you who crawled here in rags. You stole what was meant to be mine. Everyone knew it. I was to be the one." Spittle flew from her lips. "I'll show them. I'll show everyone what you really are." Before I could react, her hand shot out, not to strike me, but to the delicate silver chalice I held. She knocked it from my hand with a violent swipe. The metal clattered loudly on the stone floor, the water splashing across my white gown, leaving a dark, spreading stain. The incident immediately drew more attention. A circle of silence began to form around us. "Clumsy as well as weak. Can't even hold a cup. Is this the grace of our future queen?" Heat flooded my cheeks. This was a childish, petty attack, but in public, before the entire assembled kingdom, it was devastating. Murmurs rose. I saw Lyra from across the room, watching with a cold, pleased smile. Varen's expression was unreadable. I stood frozen, humiliation a hot wave over me. The old Elara would have fled, would have dissolved into tears, but the woman who had stood before the moonstone, who had faced down the alphas, felt something else rise, a cold, clear fury. Lysander was already moving towards us, his face a mask of thunderous anger, but he was too far away. Celine saw my hesitation and pressed her advantage, leaning in, her voice a venomous whisper for me alone. "See, you're still just a stain, a dirty little stain on his perfect reign." Her words were the final catalyst. The silvery warmth in my chest, which had been a calm presence, suddenly surged. It wasn't the soft glow of the grove, it was a flash of protective, righteous heat. I didn't move. I simply looked at her. And when I spoke, my voice cut through the murmurs like a shard of ice, carrying a resonance that was entirely my own, yet touched by something ancient. "The only stain here, Celine," I said, my words precise and dripping with contempt I didn't know I possessed, "is the one your jealousy is leaving on your own soul. You stand in the king's hall, drunk on envy, and dare to speak of grace? Look at yourself." My gaze held hers, and in that moment I did not see a powerful she-wolf. I saw a pathetic, spoiled child throwing a tantrum, and she saw that I saw it. The certainty in my eyes, the complete lack of fear, the regal disdain. It broke through her drunken rage and struck something deeper, her pride. Her confidence faltered. She took an involuntary step back, her bravado crumbling. The furious color in her cheeks drained away, leaving her pale and shaken. Just then, Lysander arrived. He didn't look at Celine, he looked at me, at the stain on my gown, at my composed, icy expression. He saw the confrontation was already over, and I had won. "Alpha Ronin," Lysander boomed, without raising his voice. Every ear in the hall strained to listen. "Your pack member appears unwell. See her to her quarters, now." It was not a request, it was a royal command, and a public rebuke so profound it echoed the one he'd given in the Silverfang Square. Ronan, his face purple with mortification, grabbed Celine's arm and practically dragged her from the hall, her earlier defiance gone, replaced by a dazed, humiliated shock. The silence lingered for a beat longer. Then Lysander turned to me. In front of everyone, he took my hand, raised it to his lips, and kissed it. Then he unfastened the heavy, silver-clasped cloak from his own shoulders, a shorter, more formal version of the one he'd given me on that first night, and draped it carefully over my stained gown, hiding the mark of Celine's spite. "A spill of wine is nothing," he announced to the room, his arm sliding around my waist. "It is the purity of the heart beneath the cloth that matters to a king and to a kingdom." The message was unmistakable. He wasn't just defending me, he was showcasing me, turning an attempt at humiliation into a display of unity and strength. The music started again, tentatively at first, then with renewed vigor. The incident was over, but its impact reverberated. I had been attacked, not with politics or theology, but with base, personal cruelty, and I hadn't flinched. I had faced it down with a queen's cold wrath and a king's unwavering support. As the celebration resumed, Alpha Thorens stomped over, clapping a massive hand on Lysander's shoulder. "By the moon, lad," he rumbled, his eyes twinkling at me with genuine approval. "She's got a spine of Valerian steel, that one, and a tongue sharper than my best axe. You chose well." Even Isolde offered a faint, approving nod from across the room. Later, as we finally left the hall, the weight of the cloak on my shoulders was familiar, but its meaning had deepened. It was no longer just a shield offered by a king, it was a banner worn by a queen. Back in the Sunstone suite, as Mira clucked over the stained gown, Lysander stayed. He stood before me, his stormy eyes soft. "You didn't need me," he said, quietly, wonder in his voice. "I always need you," I replied, the truth of it absolute. "Not to fight for me, to fight with me." He smiled, a true, warm smile that reached his eyes. "The conclave is over. The Alphas leave tomorrow. The challenge was met and surpassed." He reached out, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. "But the greatest challenge remains." I knew what he meant. Not Celine, not Varen, not the court. The challenge within. The wolf. The moonpool's silent question. "I'm ready," I whispered, the certainty settling in my bones. Not a boast, but a truth. The trials of the conclave had forged me.
"I'm ready," I whispered, the certainty settling in my bones. Not a boast, but a truth. The trials of the conclave had forged me. The silvery warmth was no longer a faint echo, but a steady, waiting power. "Tomorrow night," he said, his voice a vow. "After they have all gone, we go to the pool. Not for them, for you." I nodded, my heart a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The world's eyes would be turning away from Stonehaven, and in the quiet that followed, I would finally turn my own eyes inward to meet the reflection that had been waiting for me all along. The final test awaited, not in a hall of wolves, but in a silent circle of water under the moon. Chapter 15. Moonflower. The last of the Alphas departed Stonehaven at noon, their sleds and riders pouring out of the gates like a retreating tide. The silence they left behind was not empty, but full. It was the silence of a held breath finally released, of a citadel settling back onto its foundations after bearing a tremendous weight. The conclave was over. The kingdom had been shown its future, and the future had held firm. I stood with Lysander on the high balcony, watching the final delegation, the Silverfangs, disappear into the pine forest. Ronan did not look back. Celine was nowhere to be seen, likely kept shrouded in a sleigh. A chapter of my life was closing, its final bitter page turned. Lysander's hand was warm on the small of my back. "It is done," he murmured. "No," I said softly, surprising us both. I turned to look at him. "It is just beginning." He understood. His stormy eyes held mine, and in them I saw the same solemn anticipation that had been building in my own soul all day. The external trials were over. Now came the internal reckoning. The day passed in a strange, suspended quiet. I felt like a bowstring drawn taut, waiting for the release. I walked the gardens with Mira, but my feet carried me inevitably toward the wild, sacred grove. I didn't enter the circle, just stood at its edge, looking at the moonstone. In the daylight, it was just a beautiful white rock, but I could still feel its latent song, a vibration in the earth that echoed the one in my chest. As twilight stained the sky with deep violets and the first star pierced the canopy, Lysander came for me. He was dressed simply again, as was I, in the same unbleached linen shift from the ritual. No words were needed. He took my hand and we walked together, not as king and queen to be, but as two souls approaching a threshold. The grove at dusk was a place of profound magic. The ancient trees were sentinels in the glooming. The air was still and cold, scented of snow and pine and wet stone. The moon pool lay in the center, a perfect circle of water so black and still it looked like a hole in the world, reflecting the darkening sky above. "This is your journey," Lysander said, his voice a low rumble in the sacred quiet. He released my hand. "I am here. I will always be here, but this path is yours alone." I nodded, my heart a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The world's eyes would be turning away from Stonehaven, and in the quiet that followed, I would finally turn my own eyes inward to meet the reflection that had been waiting for me all along. The final test awaited, not in a hall of wolves, but in a silent circle of water under the moon. When I looked down into the water at my feet, the moon's reflection shattered into 1,000 pieces of dancing silver on the black surface. And as I watched, those pieces began to change. They didn't coalesce into the image of a wolf, they bloomed. From the center of the pool, where my heart would be, a soft, radiant light, my light, began to grow. It unfurled from within the water, not as a beast, but as a shape of breathtaking, impossible beauty. It formed the image of a magnificent flower, its petals made of solidified moonlight, layered and complex, glowing with an inner pearlescent luminescence. A moonflower, a thing of myth. It was both fiercely strong and heartbreakingly delicate, rooted in the dark depths, but reaching for the sky. And in the heart of the glowing flower, I saw the essence of a she-wolf, not a physical form, but her spirit, noble, watchful, gentle yet unyielding, with eyes that held the patience of centuries and the quiet fury of a protector. She was not separate from the flower, she was its heart. This was my truth, not a wolf of tooth and claw, but a spirit of luminous resilience, a guardian's heart in a form of ethereal strength. Tears streamed down my face, hot against the cold water. They were not tears of sadness, but of utter, overwhelming recognition. This was me. This had always been me. The weakness, the lack, it was a lie. I was not a failed wolf. I was something the werewolf world had forgotten to see. A moonflower wolf, a creature of spirit and light, a binder, a healer, a truth-seer. The vision in the water shimmered and slowly faded, but the knowing did not. The silvery warmth in my chest exploded into a full, gentle radiance that lit my skin from within. I looked at my hands under the water. They were gleaming with soft, moon-white light. A soft gasp came from the shore. Lysander was on his knees, his hand over his heart, his eyes wide with a wonder so profound it was reverence. He wasn't seeing a shift, he was seeing a revelation. I waded back to the edge, the water falling from me, the light slowly dimming to that familiar warm internal glow. I stepped onto the grass and Lysander was there, rising to meet me. He didn't ask what I saw. He saw it in my eyes, in the new, unshakable peace that settled on my features. "Elara," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "I am not what anyone expected," I said, my own voice clear as the night bell. "Not even you." He shook his head, a tear tracing a path through the stubble on his cheek. "You are more, so much more. I felt a beauty that humbles the fiercest wolf." He reached out, his fingers hovering just above my radiant skin. "My mate, my queen, my moonflower." He gathered me into his arms then, not in passion, but in awe. He held me as if I were the most precious, sacred thing in all his kingdom, which, to him, I was. The chill of the water was nothing against the furnace of his embrace, against the blazing certainty in my soul. We stood there for a long time, under the moon, in the sacred grove where the kingdom's fate had been reaffirmed and my own destiny had been unveiled. Later, back in the Sunstone Suite, wrapped in dry robes before a roaring fire, we talked. I described the vision in the pool. He listened, his astonishment giving way to a deep, thoughtful understanding. "A moonflower wolf," he repeated, the words tasting of legend. "Records speak of them centuries ago, beings of immense spiritual power, bridges between the physical and mystical realms. They were advisors to the greatest kings, healers of deep rifts. Their strength was in unity, in perception, in unwavering light. The bloodline was thought lost." He looked at me, wonder renewed. "It was not lost. It was sleeping, waiting in a girl the world called weak." The pieces of my life clicked into a perfect, heartbreaking pattern. My sensitivity, my way with herbs, my ability to see the truth in people's eyes, even my lack of a physical shift, it was all part of a whole I could never have understood. "The kingdom needs this," Lysander said, conviction hardening his voice. "It needs fangs and claws to guard its borders, yes, but it needs a heart to bind it together. It needs light to see its own truth. You are the balance, Elara, the missing piece." The path ahead, which had seemed so daunting, now unfurled with crystalline clarity. I would not be a traditional queen. I would be something new, something ancient reborn. I would counsel with a different kind of strength. I would heal not just bodies, but the divisions between packs. I would be the living proof that strength has many faces. As the new year, which had begun with my rejection, settled firmly into its stride, I stood at the window of the citadel, Lysander's arms around me. Below, the kingdom slept, its mountains and forests shrouded in peaceful dark. But I could feel it, the subtle threads of connection, of tension, of hope. I could feel the living web of the realm, and I knew, with a certainty that was my new gift, that my place was to tend it. I was Elara, rejected by the pack, chosen by the Alpha King, revealed by the moon. I was not a wolf as they knew it. I was the moonflower in the winter's heart, blooming with a light that would guide a kingdom out of the darkness of its old ways and into a new, more beautiful dawn. My story was not one of becoming a wolf. It was the story of a queen discovering her true crown was not of metal, but of moonlight, and her throne was not a seat of stone, but the united heart of a people she was born to heal.